Okay. Hello, Tim.
Good afternoon.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing okay.
I can see this time is just not going to work in the summertime.
Yeah, I think we may have to try. I'll have to talk to them and see if maybe we move it to the evening. See if we can get some people.
How you been feeling?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good. Stay that way.
Yes, definitely. Somebody I know personally, it's the first person I know, was diagnosed with COVID-19 this week.
Uh,
I haven't known anyone, I really well, like a really good friend. But what's
yeah.
interesting is she was diagnosed positive, but her husband is negative.
Huh.
I
Yeah,
know.
I ran into that too. We have in New York City, a good friend who came down with it. I mean, he was far enough along to be in hospice, but he recovered. He
Well,
walked
so
out.
far, she's in quarantine right now. She's had very little symptoms. We'll see what happens. But I just think it's so odd that two people live in the same place, eat dinner together every day, cook dinner together.
Same thing with her.
It just makes no sense to me.
Well,
But
apparently, like every other type of virus, some people have a high immunity rate and some people are more susceptible.
right,
So
yeah, it's
maybe we'll know more about it by the time they develop a vaccine. So
yeah, hopefully. There's
yeah.
a lot of vaccine studies out there. So
Oh, I
hopefully.
know.
There's signs. I don't know if you've got them up there in South Carolina, but there's signs all over Savannah. Call this number if you want to join the COVID-19 vaccine study.
That I haven't seen, but I think in order to, well, okay. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of those people they're looking for, who have already had it and they've recovered. So
Right.
they have it. But I haven't seen any signs like that yet.
Yeah, they also want people who are in the age groups that are more susceptible or with other pre-existing conditions that make them more susceptible. If you're an average, like 40-year-old healthy person, they don't want you.
Yeah, well, okay.
We're not. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I have a question. I don't know. It came to me as I was doing dishes earlier. Now, maybe the answer is obvious, so I'm not insulted by any means if you say that. How did Moses, living in the quote palace, how did he find out he was Jewish? Through his mother being there?
Yeah, it would have been coming from, that back then it was the whole, well, actually back then they did patrilineal or matrilineal descent. It didn't change to just matrilineal descent until actually sometime after that. So if his parents were Jewish, he was Jewish.
But he was away from his parents. He was in the palace.
But somehow he must have been told by somebody, that he was a foundling by who was it, the Pharaoh's daughter, and perhaps told him, this is how you got here. This is not you were not born here. You were not born of this family. So at somebody told him something, I guess.
Well, I wonder if he was circumcised?
It does not tell us. We know that Abraham prior had circumcised himself, and had his sons all circumcised. But whether Moses did or not, I don't think it tells us. We really, there are big gaps in what we know of Moses's life. We see the beginning, when he's discovered, and then all of a sudden he's older and working in with Pharaoh, and then gets the burning bush and the conversation.
Right, because it would be obvious if he was circumcised, he'd say, "Hey, Mom, what's this?"
What's this?
Well, he compares to other children, and he'd be different.
Well, if he had a little sister, he'd look, "What's this? She doesn't have one."
I guess just at some point he must have been told where he came from.
Right.
That's, I guess, all we can assume is then whether then he followed through or they followed through on, you know, a Brit Milah for him, because, you know, he probably wouldn't have found out till he was somewhat older.
Well, this is what I was thinking. And from what I've heard, was his sister and brother jealous of him? We heard somewhere how they gossiped about him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because even a couple portions back, there was gossip. They were gossiping about, well, no, they were actually gossiping about Aaron, I believe, rather than Moses. And Moses comes to Miriam's defense. Miriam is gossiping about something with Aaron, and Moses steps in and tries to, you know, make it all better. So there was probably sibling rivalry. You know, they were a family. Every family has sibling rivalry, so why wouldn't they not have had sibling rivalry at times? You know.
Okay, you know, the more I'm hearing from you and doing a little reading, we find out how human they are. You know?
Exactly. I mean, the thing about our, you know, matriarchs and patriarchs in Judaism is, you know, we don't have them set up where they are perfect. You know, they have flaws.
They're saints.
Yes, you know, they all have their weaknesses, they all have their flaws, and that makes them more real. I mean, I think we are guilty in society frequently of expecting our leaders to be too perfect, you know, and they're not. They're human beings. Our leaders are human beings, so they're not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to have flaws, and I'm okay with that. You know, I don't expect anyone who is a leader, you know, just like when you're a teacher in a classroom, okay, great. But I made it very clear to my students that yes, I make mistakes. Yes, I'm not perfect. I'm close to it, but I'm not.
You've been around Rabbi House too long, huh?
But no, I used to always tell them, I would tell my students, remember I was teaching high school. So I told my high school students, you know, because I was teaching English, I said, my class is more important than any other class you are taking. And they said, well, that's not fair. I said, but it's true. I said, and you can tell all your other teachers that my class is more important than theirs. And they said, well, why? I said, because without my class, you can't do any of their classes. You can't read the textbook in any other class if you don't have command of the language. I said, therefore, my class is more important. So I said, if you're making choices about doing your work, do mine first.
You won. Well,
Okay.
when you're saying about with being a teacher, my first position was in Ohio when Jeff was with the Air Force, and I taught second grade. And one time I was in the market shopping and saw one of my students.
Oh, yeah.
They went crazy. Mrs.
Right.
Kathy, you're here food shopping. I guess they thought we lived in the school.
Oh, yeah.
You
Oh,
come
yeah.
out, here you
I would
are.
see them, yeah, I'd see students with their parents in the grocery store, and they would be so shocked. I'm like, no, it doesn't just show up at my front door. I'm sorry, I have to go out and get it just like you do. You know, I think they think the only thing we did was grade papers, teach class, grade papers, you know, make lesson plans, and that's it. That's all we did. It's like, no, I do have a life beyond school. I really do. You know, so.
How old was Moses when he was told he couldn't go into the promised land? And, you know,
Before he died. Actually.
Well, I know before, but you don't know the age there.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how old he was. I mean, we have these very inflated ages in the Torah, which we know, you know, again, as Rabbi Haas has said to us many times in Torah study, we don't know how they were counting time in years back then, you know, which may be why some of these numbers don't make sense. We think of a year as 12 months and, you know, it makes sense to us, but we don't know what they were doing back then, how they were counting that. So.
Okay, all right.
All right, I'm going to start. You know, we got a couple of people here, then we'll have discussion.
Okay. It's their loss, Tim.
Yeah, exactly. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with the words of the Torah. Okay, so here we go, people. We are embarking on the final book of our Torah. Last week we finished the book of Numbers. So now we are down to the 5th book of the Torah, which is Deuteronomy. And in Hebrew, this book is called Devarim. And in Hebrew, the word Devarim means words.
Right.
Which is a pretty apt title for this book. This book is different from the other books of the Torah in that it is written primarily in the first person. Whereas the other books of the Torah are primarily in third person, this book is written primarily in the first person. And it is mostly Moses delivering a very lengthy speech or sermon, if you will, as the Israelites are standing just outside the border of the Promised Land. And there's a certain irony here, because if this book is pretty much a speech that Moses is making, if we go back to Exodus and we recall Moses' encounter with God at the burning bush, Moses expresses a great deal of shock when God informs him that he is being selected as a leader. Because one of the first things he says to God is that I'm not a man who is good with words. You know, that's not my thing. I have difficulty when it comes to public speaking. And now here we end up, the final book of the Torah, and he's doing this long, lengthy sort of sermon in front of the people. So even though this man who said, I'm not good with words, I'm not fit for leadership, is now about to give this great homily, if you will, as the Israelites are completing their 40 years of wandering, and they're finally going to enter the land that God has promised them. But unfortunately, the land that Moses himself cannot enter. So he can stand there at the border, he can look across from the mountain and gaze down upon the Promised Land, but unfortunately, he's not going to be able to set foot in it, even though he spent all this time leading the people to it. It clearly seems.
Surprised, Tim?
Pardon me?
Are you surprised that he's not allowed to go in?
Well, if we put it in the context of what we've seen in the Torah, when God gets displeased, God sets down some kind of punishment. And when Moses disobeyed God with the striking the rock for the water with his rod, when God said, no, you were just supposed to talk to the rock, you weren't supposed to strike it. And then he and Aaron sort of took credit for this when it was actually God. They don't give God credit for having worked this sort of miracle. God is displeased, and he says, for this reason, you're not going to get to go into the Promised Land. And we've seen God, make punishments already. So surprised, I don't know that I'm surprised, a little bit saddened for him. I feel bad for him, after all that he's done. And he does ask God later in the Torah if God will rescind, can I please, can you change your mind? Can I please, maybe have a second chance and go into the Promised Land? And God second time says, nope, sorry, not going back on that. So I do feel sorry for him. I mean, here he's put up with all this, all this 40 years, and he can only gaze down upon it, but he can't actually set foot in it, and he will die. Moses will die never having entered the Promised Land. But the one thing we see in this particular Torah portion, and in the whole book of Deuteronomy, really, is that Moses has kind of grown into his role as a very strong and very capable leader. So what he does here, and he starts in this particular chapter or this first portion of the Torah, is he starts going through a review of the history of the Israelites' 40 years of wandering. He talks about the successes they've had. He talks about the failures that they've had along the way. But the one thing that Moses continually does is he returns to one central theme. He continues over and over again to remind the people of their covenant with God and the importance of abiding by it and living up to it. He keeps reiterating that several times. So God, what he tells the people is God's done his part. He stayed with you. He got you here. I led you here with the help of God. I now expect you as the people to do your part, and that's live up to the covenant with God. And though Torah scholars don't really believe that Moses sat down and wrote this book out, nor do they think he had a secretary who was transcribing his speeches as he delivered them. They framed the book as being the direct words of Moses because when they were putting the Torah together, they felt that that would give the words more authority, more power than they otherwise would have had if it didn't look like Moses was speaking the words directly. So the Moses that we have presented to us here in Deuteronomy is one who has now a sense of certainty, a sense of power, a sense of leadership. He's come a long way since that burning bush episode. The challenges he's faced, even when they were ready to rebel against him in his leadership, which we saw, when they whined for better food, which we remember, when they even said, we're just going to turn around and go back to Egypt because this journey is just too hard. When they built idols, the whole golden calf incident, and turned away from God, Moses would continually plead the people's case before God, even when they seemingly didn't deserve it, even when he probably could have said, I've had enough, I'm done with this. This would take a toll on anybody. Any leader is going to, look at what happens to our United States presidents. They always look much older when they leave office than when they go into office, because the duties of leadership do weigh heavily on some people, and they show themselves physically as well as emotionally and mentally. But we still see that Moses has done a pretty good job. He has been successful. And one lesson we can derive from this Torah portion is a lesson concerning personal growth. Many of us, like Moses, probably had to grow into roles in our lives at different times. Like on a personal level, I know that I had to grow into my role as a classroom teacher. It was not magic. It didn't happen overnight. I would never, ever, and I mean this sincerely, ever want to go back and relive my first few years of standing in front of a classroom. I still had a lot of on-the-job training that I had to go through. And the training was tough. The training was demanding. I'd say at times it was even a bit brutal. I'll just be honest, at the beginning, I just wasn't that good. And I don't know that any teacher will look at their first year.
You've gotten very good, Tim.
Well, that's what happens. As it took me time, and it took me a couple of years to become a confident, masterful teacher as I stood in front of those kids 5 days a week, 5 class periods per day. And like Moses, just as we saw in the Torah, I did have my moments of doubt here and there, but we all do. As Moses recounts his ups and downs of the 40 years of wandering, and he reminds the people all they've been through, all they've endured, and they've endured a lot. He doesn't remind them of their difficulties and failures because he wants to chastise them or he wants to scold them. Actually, quite the opposite. Moses wants the Israelites to know that they've gained strength and they've come together. They've finally coalesced as a people by successfully making their way through all of these difficulties, all of these various challenges. Each difficulty they faced tested them and made them stronger and built their belief in themselves and in what they were trying to accomplish. In a sense, as they stand now at the border, just about to enter the promised land, Moses is hoping that they are feeling a sense of pride as they remember everything that they've been through. And again, he continues to remind the people that God was with you. Don't ever forget that. And that they must never, ever, ever turn their backs on God. His hope is that the strength they've gained will enable them to face challenges that will come up in the future. Because now that they're there in the promised land, there's still going to be some challenges ahead. Moses comes out of this Torah portion, out of Devarim, as a role model. He shows us what each of us can be capable of doing. He's not perfect. He has his flaws. He makes bad decisions at times. He has anger management issues. But in that way, we can all sort of relate to him because he is so much like us. He takes his flaws and he overcomes them, just as we are able to overcome ours. And we can, like Moses, look back at our lives, be proud of what we've done, be proud of how we've overcome some difficulties to get where we are now today. And one other question that our sages have raised when studying this portion is questioning, why is there a need for repetition that is present in Moses's words? Isn't Moses just repeating what we've all already been told and what we already know? Aren't we just hearing it again, even though we've already been handed down the Torah at Sinai? Well, yes, while there is repetition, we also need to remember that there's a whole new generation that is about to enter the promised land, and they need to begin to construct a new civilization. So it is, as such, it's imperative that this new generation hears these words, these Devarim, that detail all that has gone before them. In doing so, they're better prepared for the reality of beginning a new society that is a holy society and one that is in covenant with God. As the famous quote tells us, those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it. They must be made aware of their history and they need to learn from it. And it's the same for us as Jews today. We read and we study the Torah so we can understand how our people came to be, how we got here. And then every year, year after year, we read and we study it again. You would think that just one time would be enough. But as we've discussed in previous Torah study sessions, we hear the Torah, we study the Torah with a new ear each time, each year. We adapt its lessons to enlighten us on the times that we are currently living in. And perhaps this is what Moses was preparing the people for. They need to understand their past, their stories, the good and the bad. And beyond understanding them, they need to learn from them. And they, just like us, need to strive to do better and to be better. That is what God asks of us. It's our sacred duty. It's our covenantal duty as Jews. So there we have the beginning of Deuteronomy, Devarim, whether you want to use the Hebrew word or not. And we're going to see these themes reiterated throughout every Torah portion as we go through Deuteronomy. It is very much a rehashing, very much of what's already been told to us in the Torah, but also Moses continually hammering away at the Israelites that you can't forget God, you can't turn against God, God was with you, you have a covenant with God, and you need to live up to it. So, yeah.
When you said a new generation, now maybe I'm wrong going back in Hebrew school, it took so many years
40.
that 40, whatever,
Right.
that the past generation died out and this is the new. So those entering Israel, the promised land, it's a whole new generation. They're
Yes.
not people that were, okay, completely new.
That was one of the things when God said, basically he said, I'm going to make you wander for 40 years. One of the reasons that he did that was that this first generation who left Egypt, and slavery behind, would die out, so that at the time they were actually ready to enter the promised land, once they were at the very edge, the border, it would be an entire generation, new generation of people. And so they need to be reminded, you weren't around for some of this early stuff because you're a new generation. So I'm going to kind of go over it with you so you don't forget everything you went through to get to where you are today.
Okay.
Tim,
Yes.
I'm here. I was eating my lunch before, sorry, so I didn't want to disturb anybody. But so it makes sense to me that this is why we should teach our children the Torah and Judaism and everything else, because if we don't, it dies out.
Exactly.
Right? They have to be reminded.
Right.
And it's sad. I mean, listen, my children went to Hebrew school. They had a bar mitzvah, but sadly, that was it. And it's sad, but I understand the need for that because, again, a new generation, they have to hear it again, right?
Right. Right. Well, it's why we have a cycle of Torah readings so that we are reminded every year of the earliest part of our history. It's why we talked, I think last week or the week before, why do we go back to the Haggadah every single Passover and retell the story of the Exodus and coming out of slavery into becoming a free people? Because it's important to remember and learn the lessons. The lessons never get old. Every generation needs to hear them. They're important. Right. And it's even beyond Judaism. It's why we study history in school, because we are supposed to learn from the past. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of what happens in schools is it becomes nothing but a sort of rote list of dates of important events,
right,
rather than really studying the reasons. Like, okay, if we're going to study, for example, even something like the Holocaust, why? The most important question, we know what happened, but why did it happen? And how was Germany so easily hoodwinked by this man who was able to take dictatorial, fascist control of perhaps at the time the most enlightened nation in Europe, most educated nation in Europe. So more important than knowing the facts, the dates, the important people, yes, we need to know those things. But more important is to look, the two questions as a teacher that I always went back to were how and why.
Was what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The
Was
two most important questions on anything is
Yeah.
how and why, because you can't answer them with one word. You
right.
can't answer a how question with one word. You can't answer a why question with one word. You really have to think and formulate a full idea or even many ideas if you're going to think about the why and the how.
Well, I just have to say that the way things are going today, many people are not listening to the how and why. Correct?
I think you're right. Because the how and the why questions are the challenging questions. They're the tougher questions. And a lot of people don't want to be challenged. A lot of people don't want to think about the tougher questions. They want it to be easy. I mean, we are a society that's very, what's the word? We're instant gratification. If I have to stop and think about it, that's too much. I don't want to do that. So, you know, people
Not good.
No, people avoid
Not good.
the difficult and want to go with the easy answer. When I was studying government in school, the one thing that was always interesting was when you're studying different kinds of government in countries, the most efficient kind of government is a dictator.
What is
If you
that?
have a dictator, it's very efficient. Why? He's whatever he says goes.
Yeah.
You don't have to go through a Congress or a legislature or a parliament or whatever they call it in whatever country. A dictator makes a rule, a law, and there it is. Very efficient. In our country, democracy is not so efficient. Not so efficient. It's got to be debated in the House of Representatives. It's got to be debated in the Senate. Then they have to get together and iron out the differences. Then they have to go back and debate it again and then debate it again. And then maybe they come up with a compromise. Maybe, not guaranteed, maybe. Then it
Right.
goes to the president. The president may see things he doesn't like, send it back. Then it comes back again. The president can sign it, veto it, and then it starts all over again.
Right. Well, depends on how many people do the right thing, Tim.
Well, everything depends on how many people do the right thing. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who don't want to think about that again. I don't know why, but
You're on.
Yeah. I feel terrible for Moses also, as you do. Really, that's my feeling about it. Because it bothers me that God was a vengeful God. I mean, look what Moses did, as you said, and I don't understand the reason why he wouldn't let him go. I really don't.
I guess, when your parents, back in the day when you were a kid, your parents made a decision and it's like, that's it, don't ask, I'm sticking to it.
Right.
I guess that was God. God said, this is the decision that I made for your disobedience. I'm sticking to it and I'm not changing my mind. So I guess we could look at God in some ways as being a very strict parent.
I forget, did his wife, I'm sorry, Flash, did his wife stay with him? Was it Miriam?
No, Miriam's his sister.
Oh, no, his wife was, I'm forgetting.
I can't remember her name either, right?
Yeah, Moses' wife, that's terrible. We don't know her, but did she go on or did she stay with him?
Tim,
Pardon me?
is her name Sephora?
Sephora, yes.
Because that's my Hebrew name, so
Yeah.
I remember it. Okay, all righty.
It's interesting. So often, as with other characters in the Torah, and often with the women, they come, they go, and we don't really have a lot of background on what happened to them, how they ended up, etc. So I don't really know whether I don't think she was still with them at this point. There is no mention of her at this point in the Torah.
Really? Wow.
I think a lesson can be learned how well Moses dealt with it. Here we are generations later and feeling his disappointment and pain. And from what I heard, he had to train the new leader going in. So it was not just a matter of you can't go. Here he had to train him and get him ready to go. And did he just stay? They left and he stayed there by himself. Did anyone else stay with him? Or
Well, no, when we get to the end of this book of the Torah, we get to the end of Deuteronomy, Moses actually passes away. I mean, after the people enter the promised land, God has kind of told him, you know, this is it for you. You know, you're going to have your chance to look at it. You can see it. You can't go in, but you can at least see it, and you can at least feel the success as the people go into the promised land. And then you're going to pass away, because at the very end, there is this moving sort of, it's like a poem actually that Moses speaks to the people, and then shortly thereafter that he perishes.
Oh, he.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's done what God asked him to do, you know, and like I said, he's flawed, but he stuck with it. You know, at times when I'm sure he probably didn't feel like it, but you know, he knew, and he made very clear, I can't go in, but you are. And yes, he does have to get Joshua ready to take over the leadership of the Israelites, because just because they're at the promised land, it's not just all of a sudden going to become, you know, a piece of cake. You know,
Why Joshua? Why not Aaron? They would not have.
Aaron has passed away already. Aaron has already passed
away. I didn't
Good
realize.
reason.
That's a good reason.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Good reason not to appoint Aaron, but Joshua had, I forgot, the tribe was known for their strength, and Joshua was known to have leadership qualities. So it would probably be a very fitting choice to pick somebody with those qualities to continue to lead the people, because as I said, there's still going to be a host of issues once they start to set up their, you know, society and all of that. It just doesn't become, you know, easy now.
Did Joshua leave Egypt, or he was born on the way? I mean, the way we're saying a whole new generation. Where did
he was born? He's not as old as Moses, so he was either very young when they left, or he was born somewhere along the way, because he's not elderly like Moses is.
Right.
Tim, in the Ten Commandments movie, they show Joshua as an adult leaving Egypt. Is that true?
I don't know. Again, the Ten Commandments movie plays fast and loose with some of the facts.
Yeah,
you know?
a little fast and loose.
As most biblically based movies do, whether you're talking Jewish based from the Torah or from the New Testament. I mean,
and that was Charlton Heston they had playing, wasn't that?
Yeah.
Moses, yes. Because remember when Moses comes down from the mountain, all of a sudden his hair is all white and whatever, you know, because he just had that conversation with God and all of that. I have to be honest, it's not a movie I like. I mean, I've seen it several times, but I just find it a little over the top, I guess.
It is. It's very theatrical.
Hollywood, come on.
It was very successful, you know. Hollywood likes to do it up big.
Yeah, look at it this way. If it was Bollywood, he would have come down and broken into song and dance.
There's that too, which might have made it for an interesting sort of twist on everything too. Well, look what they took with, you know, in the New Testament, they took Jesus, turned him into a rock star with Jesus Christ Superstar.
Right. And it certainly went over well.
It went over very well. They did the same thing with Joseph, because remember Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor.
Yeah.
Right.
So we have our you know, rock and roll musical character from the Torah.
And now we have Hamilton.
We have historic people, you know, so you can take people from the Torah, from the Bible, you can take them from the history books, and if you find some composer who can do the words and the music and all that, they become immortalized on Broadway.
Right.
Tim, going back to Moses with him not feeling comfortable, what?
Go ahead.
With him not feeling comfortable speaking. Wasn't that when he took his hand, he put his hand with the coals and then put it in his mouth?
Right. He was a stutterer. I mean, Moses.
That's what I was going to ask. It was stuttering. Is that his problem?
Right.
Okay.
That was his. That's why he tells God that I think maybe you're choosing the wrong person. You know, maybe there'd be someone, you know, who would be better than I would be. But, you know, and again, here's where we see God putting his foot down. No, I've made my decision. You're the one that I'm choosing. And so you just have to believe you're going to be able to do this, you know.
So as he spoke, you're saying this last speech, did he have supposedly stuttering, or he felt more and more comfortable and it was gone?
We never see the actual stuttering. It comes up, you know, Moses brings it up, but we never see it again in the Torah. So somehow, you know, that was something that he was just telling God. But this last book, which is supposed to be this very long speech from Moses, is very eloquently written. And Torah scholars kind of wonder, like, who did actually put this all together, because it does have an eloquence to it, which I guess is showing Moses as having grown into this great leadership that he's demonstrated throughout the years. But we see no evidence of a stutter, no evidence of being at a loss for words, putting ideas together, because the book of Deuteronomy in many ways is probably, in terms of just the writing style of the book, the most eloquently written of all of them.
Really?
Yes.
Tim, I have a question.
Sure.
So he left, Moses died alone, right?
From what we know, he goes up to the mountain, he looks, and then he passes away. And there's no indication that there was any suffering or any difficulty. We're led to believe that it was something that was just very peaceful.
So what, did he just lie there in his body and decay? Because nobody buried him.
I don't know. Again, that's one of those details the Torah doesn't tell us, whether anybody comes out and, has the kindness to come out and do a proper burial for Moses, or, do anything. I mean, the Torah is the Torah, but it's short on details on a lot of things.
Right.
We would like to believe that somebody was, kind enough to go out and, do a proper burial for him with, everything that was required. But again, the Torah gives us no indication that it did or didn't happen. So I think in your own mind, you just kind of got to hope that at least in his final moment, once he died, he was at least treated with a certain amount of respect and dignity that would befit all he had done.
Right.
That they just didn't sort of say, oh, well, there's Moses for you. But,
Right.
And this is why sometimes, we have to take a little literary license, because it's up to us to kind of sometimes fill in the gaps with what's not there. I mean, oftentimes we have to just sort of, in our own minds, fill in what the Torah doesn't tell us.
Well, it would make us feel better, wouldn't it?
Well, it would make me feel better to think that Moses was treated with some dignity and some respect.
Right.
Just at that point in death, that I would hate to think that it just sort of like fell over dead and that was it and nobody cared.
Right.
What does Moses mean as far as gathered up from the waters, something like that?
Right. Yeah. From the waters, taken up from the waters. So, which of course was his beginning. Had that not happened, the Torah would be very different, because we wouldn't have a Moses.
Did Miriam give the name and then the Pharaoh?
No, I believe it was actually Pharaoh's daughter who named him. Yeah. Right. When she pulled him out of the reeds in the water, she said, I believe that it says, I shall call him Moses because I drew him from the water. So I believe it's actually Pharaoh's daughter who is given credit with doing the baby naming here.
Okay.
So that was an Egyptian name?
I don't know the derivation of whether it was Egyptian, Arabic, whatever they were speaking
Arabic,
at that time. Hebrew, well, actually the day-to-day language of the Hebrews, the Israelites, was Aramaic. Hebrew was reserved simply for prayer and liturgy, as opposed to the day. I mean, they were very close. I mean, Aramaic, and Jesus allegedly was preaching in Aramaic as well.
Right.
When he was around, because that was the daily spoken language of the Jews. So if you wanted to, get your message across, that's what you spoke. Hebrew being reserved for the priesthood, and for in the temple services and things of that sort.
Was Aramaic written with Hebrew letters?
Yes. You can't tell that. Well, okay, for example, the Kaddish, the mourner's Kaddish is Aramaic. It is not Hebrew.
Yes, it's not Hebrew.
I didn't know that, Jeff.
Yeah, it sounds like Hebrew, and of course it's written in the same alphabet that we write Hebrew in, but it actually is Aramaic, because it was in the vernacular of the people, because the people would recite it, for death, mourning, and whatever.
Interesting.
So let me ask you this. I think I know the answer. So my husband's grandfather, his name was Moses, but what is Moshe? Is that, and then my husband was Moses and Moshe, and my grandson now is Moses and Moshe. Is Moshe the Hebrew or the Yiddish? I mean,
The Yiddish.
Oh, I see.
But they use it. But you'll hear it in Israel as well. People will still say
Right.
Joshua, because a lot of the names, the historic names that go back into Judaism were from languages beyond just Aramaic or Hebrew. Remember that once Jews went into diaspora, they were influenced by all the various peoples that were living around them.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so, I just like, so Shmuel is Samuel.
Right. I know.
So,
Right.
we have the different versions, whether it's Hebrew or Yiddish, and then our transliteration of it into an English form.
Right.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, it's just because Jews, because of what our history, when we have to wander off because here we have the end of 40 years of wandering in this Torah portion, but then after, we were expelled from so many places and, we were in diaspora and had to go live among other people. It's only natural that those other cultures,
Right.
language, food, customs, etc., are somewhat going to have an impact, on the Jews who were living there.
Right.
Which is why we have different, for example, we have different foods that are common to the Ashkenazi versus the Sephardim.
Right.
So
So a lot is the weather where it is, what you're able to grow and get.
Right. What you can grow in terms of plants, the kind of animals that can be sustained on the kind of land that you have. I mean, it all goes back to that. I mean, so we see Jews of certain different regions have slightly different customs. And I think it came up recently, I get confused whether it came up in Torah study or it came up in one of my other classes, where what the Sephardic Jews can eat on Passover and what Ashkenazic Jews are permitted to eat on Passover.
Right. Very different. Yeah.
Yep, right. I like to become, I become Sephardic during Passover.
Do you?
Because they have more choices.
What do you eat, Jim? Tim, what do you eat?
Well, see, they're allowed to have rice.
Rice, yeah.
Right.
And they have beans and stuff, and I like dishes like that.
Right.
Actually, I love Sephardic. Sephardic cuisine, Sephardic Jewish cuisine is absolutely delicious. And if in Israel, the Israeli restaurants and cuisine is very influenced by the Sephardic food.
Right.
So why do you leave it to become Ashkenaz later in the year?
I'm Ashkenazic I want to be able to eat the extra stuff during Passover. So and I don't know enough about. I mean, the Shabbat service in a Sephardic synagogue is not exactly the same. There's differences in some of the prayers and some of the liturgy, and of course they have prayers and hymns they sing that are in Ladino, which I know very little of. I mean, I've sung a few things in Ladino because our cantor in Ohio, she taught us a few different Sephardic hymns that we would sing occasionally. But it's a language that is much more influenced by Spanish.
Yes, yes.
Right.
So,
Tim,
yes.
was the bima always in the middle of the synagogue, only in Sephardic synagogues?
Ashkenazic Orthodox synagogues also traditionally
They
had
have
it
it in the middle too?
Right.
Okay.
So the idea was it would be in the middle. That's where the Torah would be, unrolled. That's where the Torah would be read, chanted, whatever. And the idea was that so people could surround the Torah and the rabbi or whoever was chanting. It was actually with Reform, the dawn of Reform Judaism was when it was actually moved to the front, and that was a clear attempt to make it look more like a church.
Oh, really?
Like a
Oh,
church.
yeah. Because Reform Judaism was trying to fit in with how everyone else was worshiping. And when you would walk into any Christian church, well,
Right.
the area where the priest or the minister would conduct the service and all of that was at the
Up front
front.
in the middle.
Right.
Mark-
And you had
It's always in the front and the middle.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with that, even though I have to. And it has nothing to do with me not liking, Christianity. I mean, I'm one of these old, traditional people that feels that it should have been kept there.
in the middle.
Sorry, that's my opinion. Yeah, the bima.
Well, we'd have to go back and we have to talk to the founders of Reform Judaism.
I know.
Abraham Geiger and some others who were the first to even do the Reform movement. But problem, we could do a class on the history of Reform Judaism, but the initial reason Reform Judaism came to be was to make Jewish worship be more similar to the way your neighbors were worshiping. So the service got shortened, no more of this, 3.5 hour Orthodox service. The language of the people was inserted so the people could pray, they could understand the prayers, that not everything was in Hebrew. In the beginning of classical Reform Judaism here in the United States, the only two things that were ever really done in Hebrew were the Shema, the Baruch Hu, and of course you would do the Kaddish in Aramaic. The rest of the service was entirely in English.
Really? I mean, I understand that part of being, more English. I do. And what else did you say? The being English and
shortening it, bringing
shortening.
in the
I get that as well. It's fine. I mean, my grandson's bar mitzvah was so long,
Oh, yes.
and my next one will be so long, but that's okay. I just feel like what you said, wanting to be like your neighbors, but we're not. We're Jews.
Well,
I'm sorry, that's just how I feel.
No, that's okay. It's okay. But look at what's happened in Reform Judaism. We have traditions that were set aside have now come back.
That's good. Yeah.
I mean, we have more Hebrew for what we didn't before.
Right.
You have more people wearing a yarmulke or a kippah, which for years nobody in a Reform synagogue would wear.
Right.
Like some rabbis wouldn't even allow it. They wouldn't permit it in their congregations. Or a talit or a prayer shawl was totally forbidden. Even at the beginning, I don't know if you remember or how much of the history of Reform Judaism, they stopped having bar mitzvahs.
Really?
There were no bar mitzvahs in early Reform Judaism. That's where we get confirmation.
So is it the same as a bar mitzvah, confirmation?
No, confirmation, which we still do it, but now we do it in high school, kind of as a way of, the culmination of your Jewish education, your post bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah education. But confirmation was brought in initially to replace the bar mitzvah. There were no bat mitzvahs. The first bat mitzvahs didn't happen till the 1920s, and that came out of Reconstructionism. Reconstructionist Judaism, Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan was the first one to do a bat mitzvah for his own daughter before it was adopted by Reform and conservative synagogues.
Well, the Orthodox don't do bat mitzvahs.
Because women aren't required to.
Right. Well, I know that. But I'm happy about these, whoever decided to change and progress and move forward in, reform. I'm happy about that.
Things change.
But don't forget, everything is evolving. Don't forget that the conservative movement itself got less conservative because they started to welcome the women up to the bima, and eventually the women became rabbis, cantors, and then rabbis. So,
Right.
The conservative movement itself, where it was once closer to Orthodox, it moved a little more left, and the Reform movement, so to speak, if you're looking for a direction, might have moved a little more right, a little more conservative.
I mean, if you look at both Reform and conservative, the lines that separate them now in our current, the way we are today, are pretty limited. I mean, there's very little disagreement between, the conservative rabbis and seminaries, what they're teaching, and the Reform rabbis and the seminaries, what they're teaching. We've gotten much closer in understanding Judaism in the modern world. Whether that's going to continue. I've read articles from rabbis who are Reform and rabbis who are conservative, who say that over time, the lines will fall completely and the two will just merge and there'll be just one movement.
That's interesting.
I mean, that's good.
No, I mean,
I'm not saying that everything should be thrown out. There's just certain traditional things.
Right. Oop, everybody just froze. Everybody just froze. What happened?
I guess Rena.
Rena froze for a minute.
Oh,
Yeah,
I froze.
Yeah, everything froze for a second.
Now
I
our
was
internet
bro-
is
oh,
unstable.
Oh,
Right.
okay. I was brought up Orthodox and I was confirmed, and that was in the 1950s.
Right.
So I know what you're
What age
saying.
were you? What age did they do that? Do you remember?
Um,
Oh, let's go back.
I think I don't even think it was in lieu of a bat mitzvah. I think it was, I finished the Hebrew school because I think I was like 15 or 16.
Right.
If I'm
Right.
not
That would be
That's
about,
what Tim said, yeah.
yeah, it was more of a high school thing. The confirmation
Yeah,
thing was much
yeah.
more of a high school age thing than it, more, whereas now when we do bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, it's more of a middle school age kind of
My
stuff.
cousin was visiting from Israel, Yona Jeff, and she came and she had never seen a confirmation. What is this with a woman? It was a very,
Right.
very interesting
Right.
type thing then.
It's like everything, our movements, our religion continue to evolve and change. If they don't evolve and change, they're going to get stagnant and then they're just going to fall apart.
No, I'm happy about all that. Look, the conservative, my son's shul, and I tend to go say shul because that's how I was brought up. They totally welcome LBGT,
Right.
gay, lesbians,
Right.
everything. And even, I don't want to say mixed, people that are married, to Jews and Gentiles. And this is
Intermarried
conservative.
couples. Right.
Yeah,
Intermarried
yeah,
couples,
couple, right. So, I mean, that's all good,
Right. Right. So, I mean, there again, you see them moving much in line with the reform way of thinking, in that we really should not be turning people who are Jewish away, regardless, and
Right.
even including intermarried couples. The one thing that made a lot of intermarried couples, decide to turn their backs on Judaism was they were made to feel unwelcome at a synagogue.
Right.
Well, you want them to still have connection to Judaism, bring their children up with the knowledge of Judaism. You got to make them feel welcome. Turning your
Right.
back on them does not keep them.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
years ago, it was almost what you call a shanda, that certain times parents would say the Kaddish, my child has died, they're
Oh, yeah.
not part, they carried on. Now, and they're feeling, and this is much more the reform movement, keep the door open.
Exactly.
That way they come in and many of them can convert, feel comfortable. It's amazing. I have spoken to several people lately who have converted, and they practice more traditional Judaism than a lot of Jews that were born and raised Jewish. They feel very strongly about their Judaism, and they have said that many times they were made to feel unwelcome. And Jeff said, it is, what did you call it? That if they don't accept a convert, it's considered
That's a sin, right?
it's a sin. Am I
It is.
right?
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, I think it's sad. I didn't need Jeff to say that, but if someone makes the choice, I think it's wonderful and people should be very welcoming about it.
Well, I
But-
think the
Of
thing,
course.
too, if adults make a choice to join and to convert, they've made an adult level decision. They've studied it, and
Right.
oftentimes I think that's why they are more in tune with their Judaism, because they came to it as adults with a very conscious decision. When you're born with something, unfortunately, you kind of take it for granted. I mean,
Right.
Good way
So
to
true.
put it.
Yeah.
but when you made a choice as an adult, say, this makes sense to me, this is a spiritual path that I think will work for my life, and I see the beauty in it and the traditions and all of that, then I think you are very apt to want to make sure that you're keeping a Jewish home and you're following, the Jewish rituals and the holidays and all of that, because it's new to you and you made a conscious choice for it. You didn't have it thrust on you when you were born. I mean,
Very true.
the Reform is the only one, there was the only movement that keeps track of converts. How many we get, how many converts we get. We actually keep track. The conservative movement, last I knew, did not, and the Orthodox do not. So we don't really know how many people, in terms of a conservative conversion or Orthodox conversion, but in Reform, there is actually a certificate of conversion that the rabbi signs, and then is actually a copy of it is sent on to the URJ. So they know each year, how many people have made the choice to become Jewish.
Years ago, if I'm talking hundreds of years ago, if someone chose to convert, how was that done? Did they go and take learning and then they were accepted, or?
The first thing that was done years and years ago was that the rabbi would slam the door in their face and tell them no. If they were persistent, the theory being they were persistent enough to keep coming back and asking, the number that's often said is 3 times. If they came back a 3rd time and said, no, Rabbi, you keep turning me away, you keep shutting the door on me, but I'm serious, I really do want to study Judaism, and I want to convert, and I want to follow Judaism as my faith, my spiritual path, then finally the rabbi would relent, and then would have to set up a course of study with the rabbi to learn what they would need to know. I mean, now we have classes, like I teach the Judaism 101, which people who come to Mikveh Israel expressing desire to convert, that's part of the requirement. You have to take Judaism 101 so that you learn the holidays, you learn about the Shabbat service, you learn a little bit of the history, we talk about anti-Semitism, so that you're coming into making a choice. And after Judaism 101 is over, if you decide it's not for you, fine. We don't, the one thing we don't as Jews do, we don't keep calling you on the phone and say, hey, are you ready? Hey, are you ready? Once you've taken the 101 class, it's then on your responsibility to then follow up with meetings with the rabbi, and he will continue to work with you. And then it's ultimately a mutual decision between the rabbi and the person who's converting as to when they're really ready. And then they'll do the mikvah, they'll do the bet din, and all of the things that require for conversion.
Does the rabbi give since they've gone through this learning, did they take a test or a quiz or something?
No, what really happens is you have the bet din. The bet din is the Jewish court. It's the rabbi and 2 other people. They must be Jewish, obviously, but 2 other people who are knowledgeable. I've been on bet dins for different people. We sit and chat. It's not meant to be intimidating. Basically, we want to know, why, what this means to you. Why did you make this choice? What do you feel you bring to the Jewish community? What do you feel you bring to the life of the synagogue? It's just a conversation. Now, back in the old days, it would be a severe question and kind of thing. We don't want to be intimidating. If you put your time and energy into learning all you've learned, we want to be as welcoming and, just know and make you feel comfortable. I mean, that's most bet dins that I've sat on, it's kind of like just sitting around with a cup of coffee and chatting.
And they get to pick their Hebrew name, or it's picked for them?
Yeah, they can choose if they want to honor somebody in their family. They can do that. If they want to honor somebody in the Torah, they can do that. I mean, the rabbi will help. I mean, if they said, I just don't know, because a lot of names, they all have meaning. So maybe you want to pick something that fits your personality, or fits your, livelihood or something. So if you really are kind of at a loss, the rabbi will sit down with you and say, well, let's talk a little bit. We can talk about some names that might be appropriate.
What name did you pick, Tim?
Adam.
Oh, boy, for Adam.
Yeah.
That's my son's name.
Well, I picked it because that was actually my dad's name.
Oh, okay.
My dad was Adam, so I felt it was a way to honor my father by taking his name as my Hebrew name.
Very,
That's
very
beautiful.
So,
Tim, thank you so much. I have to go.
okay, well, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye, Flossie and Jen. I enjoyed this so much because we gotta only have a couple of people, so it was very intimate. It was intimate, but thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye.
All right. Any last comments, thoughts before we close up for today?
I gotta.
Tim, can I ask you a question and you don't have to answer it? When did you choose to become Jewish?
You're being recorded.
We converted, Caleb and I converted, we did the whole thing together. We converted to see, it's now 27 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, 27 years. When we met, we were both on a kind of path of looking for something spiritual, not sure where it was going to take us, where it was going to head us. And I had always from the time I was in middle school, had an interest in Judaism. I don't even know why exactly, but I read books about it. You know, I would read books that had Jewish characters and I would become fascinated by the rituals and the things. So it was always kind of in the back of my mind, you know. And so at one point we were sitting and talking and I said, well, maybe we should consider Judaism. You know, maybe that's something we should do. So ultimately we called the rabbi at our synagogue in Ohio. And I mean, he wasn't our rabbi then. And we went in and met with him and talked to him. And he said, okay. And we started going to synagogue services pretty regularly, almost every week. We took his Judaism 101, Intro to Judaism course. Everything kept fitting in the right way. The more we learned, the more we wanted to know. And then until we finished everything, we did our final conversion. And then a year later, they sent both of us to this para-rabbinic program at Hebrew Union College, where we were given training for lay leadership in the congregation. It was 14 days from 8 o'clock in the morning till 9:30 at night of learning. And I mean, it was very intense, but I loved it. It was great. We were there with people from congregations all over the country. There were about 40 of us in the program, all going to go back to our synagogues and be lay leaders in the synagogue. So I would do services if the rabbi was out. Now remember, this was a congregation that was very Friday night. It was very much a Friday night congregation. We only really did Saturday Shabbat services when there was a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah.
I hear you.
We did Torah studies on Saturday mornings, but I would do Friday night services. I would write Devar Torah. I actually did funerals for people.
Oh, wow.
The only thing we were not allowed to do as part of this program, we could not marry people. We did not have the legal authority to marry. And we could not do conversions. You needed a rabbi or cantor to ultimately sponsor the conversion. I mean, I could help and I could help with the learning, but the actual conversion process because you had to have a signature on the conversion certificate of either a rabbi or a cantor. So and here we are.
Sharing. We're glad that you did it and you're.
I'm so glad I did it too. It's one of the decisions in my life that I have never regretted for even 1 second.
That's terrific. Well, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Tim.
Have a good weekend.
Right, you too. Thank you.
Are you going to be there Tuesday for part of it at least?
Oh, yeah. Well, we want to be there for the whole thing. We're going to tell the other teacher we're coming.
Okay. Okay. Very good. I'll see you Tuesday.
Picture, Tim, a whole week and 2 very good classes at the exact time.
It's tough, but it's nice that we at least have the options and choices, though.
Yeah, you are that we can get caught up on the calendar one and Poland.
Yes.
They were done.
Well, Jennifer's been on vacation, so I'll get with her. I think the Poland one may already be there. But
Okay, we'll check it.
Check it out.
Yeah, it should be on the YouTube. Go look. I don't think that the other one is, but when Jennifer will be back this week, I'll talk to her about it.
Okay, terrific.
Be well.
Okay.
Bye,
Right,
guys.
bye.
All right, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.